Something is happening in the global financial system right now that hasn't happened in 80 years. You go to the grocery store and you feel it. You look at rent prices and you see it. But what you are feeling is just the aftershock of an earthquake that started thousands of miles away in the quiet. Closed-door meetings of 5 specific central banks. For decades, the United States dollar has been the sun that the entire economic solar system revolves around. It was the safe haven. If the world was on fire, you bought American debt because it was the only thing that wouldn't burn. But suddenly, almost in sync, 5 major nations have started heading for the exit. They aren't just selling a few bonds to pay the bills. They are dumping American debt at a pace that suggests they know something the average American worker does not. If just one country does this, it's a diplomatic spat. When 5 do it at the same time, it is not a coincidence. It is a coordinated escape plan. And if they get out before the rest of the world realizes what is happening, the dollars left in your savings account might just become the bag that someone else left you holding. Welcome back to Finance Explained. Today, we are not just looking at charts. We are looking at the crime scene of the next global financial shift. Before we connect the dots on who these nations are and why their timing is so suspicious, do me a quick favor. If you want to stay ahead of the money game while everyone else is just trying to catch up, hit that like button and subscribe right now. It helps us get this information out to more people who need to hear it before the news cycle catches up. Now, to understand why this sell-off is terrifying, you have to understand the magic trick that has kept the American economy alive for the last 50 years. It's actually pretty simple. America spends more money than it makes. A lot more. To fill that gap, the Treasury issues debt in the form of bonds. For a long time, countries like China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia lined up to buy that debt because it paid interest and it was safe. It was the perfect arrangement. We got cheap TVs and oil. They got a safe place to park their profits. But that arrangement was based on one very fragile thing: trust. Trust that the dollar would hold its value, and trust that the United States would always be the dominant superpower. Right now, that trust is evaporating faster than water in the desert. We are seeing a shift that looks less like a market adjustment and more like a mutiny. The first nation leading this charge shouldn't surprise you, but the speed at which they are moving is absolutely staggering. China has been the largest foreign banker to the United States for a generation. But look at the data from the last 18 months. They aren't just letting bonds expire, they are actively selling them. You might hear the mainstream news say, this is just because China's economy is slowing down and they need cash. That is the comfortable lie. The uncomfortable truth is that Beijing has watched what happened to Russia. They saw how quickly the US froze Russian assets overnight. China realized that holding $3 trillion of American debt isn't an asset. It's a liability. It's a leash. And they are cutting that leash as fast as they can. They are taking that money and buying gold. Massive amounts of gold. They are trading paper promises from Washington for physical metal that no government can freeze. But if it were just China, we could handle it. The real problem, and the part that should keep you up at night, is that America's best friends are doing it too. Look at Japan. Japan is supposed to be the loyal ally, the unsinkable aircraft carrier of American economic influence in Asia. For years, they bought US debt whenever we needed them to. But recently, the Japanese yen has been crashing. To save their own currency from becoming worthless, Japan has had to sell billions of dollars in US treasuries. They aren't doing it to attack America. They are doing it to survive. But the result is exactly the same. The biggest buyer in the room has stopped buying and started selling. Imagine you're trying to sell your house. But the only 2 people who can afford it just decided to put their own houses on the market instead. Suddenly, there are no buyers, only sellers. When that happens in the housing market, prices crash. When that happens in the bond market, interest rates explode. And when interest rates explode, everything you own, from your mortgage to your car payment to the national debt interest, gets more expensive. Then there's the third player in this drama. And this one is personal. Saudi Arabia. For 50 years, we had a deal. We protect their kingdom militarily, and they price oil exclusively in dollars. This was the petrodollar system. It forced every country on earth to hold dollars just to buy energy. It created an artificial demand for our currency that allowed us to print money without immediate hyperinflation. But that deal is effectively dead. Saudi Arabia is now openly discussing trading oil in Chinese yuan. They are joining economic alliances that explicitly want to destroy dollar dominance. They have reduced their holdings of US debt to the lowest levels in decades. They aren't just diversifying, they are signaling a divorce. When the country that controls the oil stops wanting your currency, the currency loses its superpower status. This isn't a theory. It is happening in real-time trade deals being signed right now. The 4th and 5th nations are where this gets really interesting because they represent the rest of the developing world. Brazil and India are massive, growing economies. Historically, they kept reserves in dollars to stabilize their own shaky currencies. But now, They are looking at the United States with its $35 trillion in debt, its political dysfunction, and its weaponized financial system. And they are saying, no thanks. They are trading with each other in their own currencies. Brazil is buying fertilizer from Russia using yuan. India is buying oil using rupees and dirhams. Every time they do this, a dollar that would have been used in that transaction stays in the United States. And when dollars stay home instead of going abroad, they chase goods here. That means inflation isn't just a temporary blip caused by supply chains. It becomes a permanent feature of your life. This is the mechanism of the trap. Now, these 5 nations, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and India, are effectively forming a blockade against American debt. They are shrinking the pool of buyers right at the moment when the U.S. government needs to borrow more money than ever before in history just to keep the lights on. Think about the timing. The U.S. government is running deficits of $2 trillion a year during peacetime. We need the world to buy our debt more than ever. Yet this is the exact moment these 5 nations have chosen to walk away. It's like a bank run, but on a global scale. And just like a bank run, it starts slowly, with a few smart people quietly withdrawing their cash, and then suddenly, everyone rushes for the door at once. We are currently in that quietly withdrawing phase, but the exit doors are getting crowded. The Federal Reserve knows this. They see the same data we are talking about here on Finance Explained. They know that if foreign countries stop buying, the Federal Reserve has to be the buyer of last resort. That means printing money to buy our own debt. It's like paying off one credit card with another credit card. It works for a month, maybe 2, but eventually the limit is reached. And when the Fed prints money to buy the debt that China and Japan are selling, that money enters the economy and dilutes every dollar in your pocket. You might be wondering why this isn't on the front page of every newspaper. Why aren't politicians screaming about this? The answer is simple: fear. If the government admits that the demand for U.S. debt is collapsing, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Panic would set in. So they talk about soft landings and resilient labor markets. They distract you with culture wars and political theater. Meanwhile, the bedrock of the American standard of living, the ability to print the world's reserve currency, is cracking. These 5 nations aren't acting out of malice. They're acting out of self-preservation. They see the math. They see a country that has addicted itself to cheap debt and has no plan to pay it back. They're getting their chips off the table before the casino closes. And the scary part is, they are the ones who have been propping up the casino for decades. Without their money, the U.S. government has to find new lenders, or it has to print the difference. And finding new lenders is getting harder every day because the yield, the interest rate, that America has to offer to attract buyers is climbing. This brings us to the most dangerous feedback loop of all. As these nations sell debt, bond prices fall, and yields rise. Higher yields mean the U.S. government has to pay more interest on its $35 trillion debt. Right now, interest payments on the debt are becoming one of the largest items in the federal budget, costing more than the entire defense budget. Let that sink in. We are spending more to pay interest to bondholders than we are on the Army, Navy, and Air Force combined. And as China and Japan sell, those interest rates go even higher, making the debt even more expensive to service, which requires more borrowing, which scares away more buyers. It is a death spiral. And the 5 nations we are discussing, they know exactly what this spiral looks like. They have studied history. They know that no empire survives a debt crisis of this magnitude without a currency collapse. Now that we've looked at the big picture of who is leaving the dollar, we need to understand the mechanism of how they are doing it without crashing the entire system overnight. It's a bit like trying to unload a truck full of dynamite while driving down a bumpy road. One wrong move and everyone blows up. These nations are being incredibly strategic. They aren't just dumping bonds on the open market all at once. They are letting them mature and simply refusing to buy new ones. This is a soft default on the dollar's supremacy. It's a slow strangulation rather than a sudden execution. But the effect is the same. Fewer buyers means higher yields, and higher yields mean more pain for the U.S. government. And here is where the story takes a dark turn. The reason they are doing this isn't just economics, it's survival. They saw what happened to Russia in 2022. When the U.S. froze hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian central bank assets, it sent a shockwave through the world. It was a weaponization of the dollar that had never been seen on that scale before. Suddenly, sovereign nations realized that their safe savings account in America could be frozen if they disagreed with Washington's foreign policy. That realization changed everything. It broke the fundamental promise of a reserve currency: neutrality. A reserve currency is supposed to be like Switzerland, neutral, safe, and accessible to everyone, regardless of politics. But the moment the dollar became a weapon, it stopped being a neutral reserve asset. China looked at its trillions in U.S. treasuries and saw a potential hostage situation. Saudi Arabia looked at its oil revenues priced in dollars and saw a vulnerability. They realized that if they ever crossed the U.S., their entire national savings could vanish. So the race for the exit began. And this race isn't just about selling dollars. It's about buying something else, something that has no counterparty risk, something that can't be printed by a central bank or frozen by a sanction. That something is gold. Central banks around the world bought more gold in the last 2 years than at any time since the 1960s. China is leading this charge, importing massive amounts of physical gold every single month. They aren't buying paper gold contracts on the COMEX. They are taking physical delivery. They want the metal in their own vaults, on their own soil. Why? Because gold is the only financial asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. If you own a U.S. Treasury bond, you own a promise from the U.S. government to pay you back. If the U.S. government decides not to pay you, or can't pay you, that bond is worthless paper. But if you own a bar of gold, you don't need anyone's permission or promise for it to have value. It just is value. The shift from promises to hard assets is the clearest signal that these nations are preparing for a post-dollar world. They are building a financial fortress that doesn't rely on the SWIFT system or the Federal Reserve. But let's talk about the domestic consequences for you and me. What happens when the world stops buying our debt? The government has two choices: cut spending or print money. And let's be honest, no politician in Washington, Democrat or Republican, is going to cut spending. They won't cut Social Security, they won't cut the military, and they certainly won't cut their own salaries. So that leaves option 2, print the money. This is called yield curve control or quantitative easing, but those are just fancy words for inflation. When the Federal Reserve steps in to buy the bonds that China and Japan won't touch, they do it with newly created dollars. This increases the money supply, which dilutes the value of every dollar already in existence. It's simple supply and demand. More dollars chasing the same amount of goods means higher prices. We saw a preview of this in 2021 and 2022. Remember $8 eggs? Remember used cars costing more than new ones? That was just a taste. If the global bond market truly revolts, the inflation we saw then will look like a picnic compared to what's coming. And this brings us to the 5th nation in our story, one that is often overlooked but critical: the BRICS alliance as a collective entity. We mentioned Brazil and India individually, but together with Russia, China, and South Africa, and now newer members like Iran and Egypt, they are building an alternative financial infrastructure. They are creating a payment system to rival SWIFT. They are discussing a new trade currency backed by gold and commodities. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's stated policy. They hold summits about it. They issue press releases. The goal is clear: de-dollarization. They want to trade with each other without touching the US dollar. Imagine a world where India buys oil from Russia, pays in rupees, and Russia uses those rupees to buy electronics from China. The dollar is completely cut out of the loop. That means trillions of dollars that used to be needed for international trade are no longer needed. Those dollars come home. And when they come home, they cause hyperinflation. This is the nightmare scenario for the US economy. It's a return to the 1970s, but with way more debt and way less industrial capacity. In the 1970s, the US was the world's largest creditor nation. Today, we are the world's largest debtor nation. We owe the world $35 trillion, and the interest on that debt is exploding. We are borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. It's a Ponzi scheme. And like all Ponzi schemes, it works great as long as new money keeps coming in. But the new money from China, Japan, Saudi Arabia is drying up. The flow is reversing. And the only entity left to keep the scheme going is the Federal Reserve, which means the only way out is to devalue the currency. That means your savings, your retirement account, your purchasing power, it's all going to be sacrificed to keep the system afloat. Now, let's get specific about Japan again, because they are the canary in the coal mine. Japan holds over $1 trillion in US debt. But their own currency, the yen, has been in free fall. The Bank of Japan has been intervening in currency markets to prop up the yen. Where do they get the dollars to do that? By selling US treasuries. It's a vicious cycle. The weaker the yen gets, the more treasuries they have to sell. The more treasuries they sell, the higher US yields go. The higher US yields go, the stronger the dollar gets against the yen, forcing Japan to sell even more treasuries. It's a doom loop, and it's happening right now. Japan is trapped. They can either let their currency collapse, which destroys their economy, or they can sell their US debt, which destroys the US bond market. They are choosing to save themselves, and who can blame them? But for the US, this means our most reliable buyer is turning into a forced seller. This isn't just about charts and numbers. This is about power. For 80 years, the US has enjoyed what economists call an exorbitant privilege. We could print money to pay for wars, to bail out banks, to fund social programs, and the world would absorb the inflation. We exported our inflation to other countries. But now, those countries are saying, no more. They are sending the inflation back, and when it arrives, it's going to hit the American middle class the hardest. The wealthy have assets, stocks, real estate, gold. that tend to rise with inflation. But the average worker has wages that lag behind inflation and savings in cash that lose value every day. This shift in global debt markets is a direct transfer of wealth from the poor and middle class to the asset-holding elite. So, what does the endgame look like? It looks like a world where the dollar is still used, but it's no longer king. It's one of several major currencies, sharing the stage with the yuan, the euro, and maybe a new BRICS currency. That sounds okay in theory, but in practice, it means a massive drop in the American standard of living. It means imports cost double. It means travel becomes a luxury for the rich. It means the government can no longer afford its promises. The safety net shreds, the military shrinks, the empire retreats. This is the historical cycle of all reserve currencies. The Dutch guilder, the British pound, they all had their century in the sun, and then they lost it because of excessive debt and overreach. The US dollar is following the exact same script. The only difference is the speed. In the digital age, with high-frequency trading and instant global communication, the collapse can happen much faster than it did for the British Empire. We've talked about the governments, the central banks, and the global power plays, but let's bring this down to your kitchen table. What does a multipolar currency world actually look like for you? It starts with the price of everything you import. Think about the electronics in your house, the clothes in your closet, the coffee in your mug. Most of these things come from overseas. For decades, Americans have enjoyed artificially low prices because the world wanted our dollars. Foreign companies would compete to sell us goods just to get their hands on our currency. That dynamic is ending. As the dollar loses its dominance, its purchasing power on the global stage weakens. That cheap flat screen TV, it's going to cost a lot more. That affordable fast fashion, not so affordable anymore. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of scarcity. The most terrifying part of this transition is what happens to energy prices. Remember, the petrodollar deal was the bedrock of cheap energy in America. If Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations start selling oil in yuan or gold, the US loses its ability to control global energy markets. We could see gas prices structurally higher, not just spiking for a summer, but permanently settling at levels that hurt. $5, $6, maybe $7 a gallon could become the new normal. And since energy is the master input for everything else, farming, trucking, manufacturing, when energy goes up, everything goes up. Food prices will climb, construction costs will soar, the cost of living will ratchet up, and wages will struggle to keep pace. This is the definition of stagflation, a stagnant economy with high inflation. It's the worst of both worlds, and it's historically very difficult to fix. But the government has a plan for this, and frankly, their plan should scare you more than the problem. Their solution to a debt crisis is almost always financial repression. This is a fancy term that means they will try to force you to hold their debt, even if it's a bad investment. How do they do this? They might change regulations to force pension funds and 401ks to hold more government bonds. They might implement capital controls to stop you from moving your money out of the country or into crypto. They might even introduce a central bank digital currency, CBDC, to gain total surveillance and control over where and how you spend your money. A CBDC is the ultimate tool for a government that is losing control of its currency. It allows them to stimulate the economy by putting money directly into your digital wallet, or cool it down by taking it out or putting expiration dates on your cash. If the dollar is failing globally, the government will try to tighten its grip domestically. This is why you're seeing such a push for regulation on cryptocurrencies and independent financial assets. It's not about consumer protection. It's about eliminating the competition. Bitcoin, gold, silver, and these are the lifeboats. And the captain of the Titanic doesn't want you getting on a lifeboat. He wants you staying on the ship to help bail out the water. The attacks on crypto, the scrutiny on precious metals transactions, these are signs of a system that is nervous. They know that if too many people exit the dollar system, the collapse accelerates. So they create friction. They make it hard to leave. They paint alternative assets as risky or criminal, while the dollar, the asset losing 5% to 10% of its value every year, is presented as safe. It is the ultimate gaslight. So where do we go from here? Is it all doom and gloom? Not necessarily. Chaos creates opportunity. The same forces that are destroying the value of the dollar are driving the value of real assets through the roof. We are witnessing the greatest wealth transfer in history. Wealth is moving from paper assets, like bonds and cash, to hard assets, like land, commodities, gold, and scarce digital assets. Those who understand this shift can position themselves not just to survive, but to thrive. The five nations dumping debt aren't just selling, they're buying. They're buying gold. They're buying infrastructure. They're buying resource rights in Africa and South America. They are following the smart money playbook. Get out of paper, get into things. The average person is sitting in a burning building, worried about the smoke, while the smart money is already outside selling fire extinguishers. You need to decide which one you are. Are you going to keep 100% of your wealth in a currency that is being abandoned by the world's biggest economies? Or are you going to diversify? This isn't financial advice. I'm a YouTuber, not a financial advisor, but it is common sense. If the biggest whales in the ocean are swimming one way, maybe you shouldn't swim the other. Watch what central banks do, not what they say. They say inflation is under control. They do buy record amounts of gold. They say the banking system is sound. They do create emergency lending facilities to bail it out. Actions speak louder than press conferences. The writing is on the wall. We are watching the end of an era. The 80-year reign of the undisputed US dollar is coming to a close, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, coordinated sales by 5 nations that have decided they've had enough. China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, India. They are voting with their wallets. They are voting for a future where they are not dependent on the Federal Reserve's printing press. They are voting for a future where real resources matter more than paper promises. And while this transition will be painful for the American economy, it doesn't have to be a disaster for you personally. History rewards those who pay attention. The people who saw the 2008 housing crash coming didn't get wiped out. They made fortunes. The people who understood the tech boom in the 90s didn't get left behind. They built empires. Today, the signal is flashing red on sovereign debt. The bond market is screaming. The smart move is to listen. This means rethinking what risk actually is. For 50 years, risk-free meant U.S. Treasury bonds. Today, holding U.S. Treasuries might be one of the riskiest things you can do. Real risk is holding an asset that is guaranteed to lose purchasing power. Real safety is holding assets that governments can't print. We are entering a period of high volatility. There will be fake-outs. There will be months where the dollar looks strong and gold dips. The media will tell you the crisis is averted. Do not be fooled. Look at the trend. The trend is structural. The debt is mathematically unpayable. The alliances against the dollar are growing, not shrinking. The train has left the station and it has no brakes. The only question is how bumpy the ride gets before it derails. So, what is your plan? Are you diversified? Do you own things that have intrinsic value? Are you learning new skills that make you valuable regardless of what the currency does? These are the questions you need to answer today. Not next year, not when the crisis is on the front page of every website. Today. Because by the time the panic hits the masses, the exit doors will be welded shut. The premiums on gold will be sky high. The capital controls will be in place. The window of opportunity is open right now, but it is closing fast. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about reality checking. The world is changing, and Finance Explained is here to help you navigate that change. We'll keep tracking the data, watching the central banks, and exposing the stories they don't want you to hear. But we need you to stay engaged. We need you to share this information with your friends and family because an informed public is the only defense against a manipulated system. If this video opened your eyes to what's really happening in the global economy, drop a comment below. Let us know. Do you think the dollar will survive as the world reserve currency for another decade? Or is the collapse coming sooner than we think? I read every comment and I want to hear your take. And if you haven't already, share this video. Send it to your group chat, post it on Twitter, get the word out. The algorithm hates this kind of truth, so we rely on you to spread it. Thanks for watching Finance Explained. Stay skeptical, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next one.